off from the movie, and I had my skis there. And I was determined not to go skiing because I realized that it would be terribly costly financially if I took a very bad spill.
Paul Newman's blue eyes were the gold standard for integrity, but those eyes saw things that turned his stomach. While the world saw a gilded age of glamour, Newman watched a gallery of monsters disguised as gods. Behind every red carpet smile sat a criminal syndicate of studio fixers who buried the crimes and silenced the victims. Let's pull back the curtain on 9 legends whose private lives were far darker than any movie villain they ever played. The illusion of Golden Age. Hollywood. Standing on the set of The Silver Chalice in 1954, a young Paul Newman felt like he'd finally made it to the peak of the mountain, but the higher he climbed, the more the air started to smell like rot. You have to understand that back then, the public saw these stars as more than just actors. They were moral compasses, the literal blueprint for how a man or woman should carry themselves in a civilized society. But while the cameras were rolling on these tales of heroism and virtue, Newman was watching something entirely different happen in the shadows just inches outside the frame. He saw the King of Hollywood staggering into his trailer with a bottle of scotch and a dark secret involving a hit and run, and he watched as the industry's most beloved father figure used a leather belt to keep his children in a state of constant, trembling terror. It wasn't just that these people were flawed. It was that they were part of a massive, well-oiled machinery of silence. The studios didn't just make movies. They operated like a private intelligence agency with their own police force and their own judge and jury. If a star killed a pedestrian or assaulted a minor, a phone call was made to a man named Eddie Mannix, the legendary MGM fixer, who spent his nights bribing witnesses and burying evidence in the Hollywood Hills. Newman carried these observations with him for decades, and as he got older, that famous integrity of his wouldn't let him keep the secret any longer.
That I should be patted on the back for that, because some guys get into the hassle so big they can't do anything else. They can't shake hands with another person.
He started to drop names, and the names he dropped belonged to the very icons we still have hanging on our walls today. Today, we aren't just talking about bad behavior. We are exposing a criminal syndicate run by the studios to protect their most profitable predators. From the child beaters to the literal killers who walked free because a fixer paid the price. This is the Hollywood Paul Newman tried to warn us about. And first up, we'll have you asking, what happens when the world's greatest hero hunts children instead of gold? 1. Errol Flynn, the swashbuckler's predatory playground. Think about Errol Flynn for a second. In 1938, he was the definitive Robin Hood, the man every kid wanted to be and every woman wanted to be with. He had this infectious, mischievous grin that suggested he was always in on a joke, but the reality was far more sinister. According to the 1942 court transcripts from the Los Angeles Superior Court, the joke was actually a calculated hunt for teenage girls. Flynn had built a lifestyle that revolved around what he called the Mulholland Farm, a sprawling estate equipped with two-way mirrors and hidden peepholes. While the public saw a hero fighting for the poor on screen, the private reality involved Flynn standing trial for allegations of alleged abuse involving 2 minors. Now, here is where the fixer element comes in, because Flynn should have gone to prison for a very long time. But Warner Brothers couldn't let their biggest action star rot in a cell. They poured thousands of dollars into a defense team that didn't just argue his innocence. They systematically destroyed the reputations of the young victims on the witness stand, painting them as promiscuous to save a grown man's career. Newman later remarked to his inner circle that he'd never seen such naked arrogance as when Flynn walked out of that courtroom, lit a cigarette, and smirked that the ladies would still love their Robin Hood. He knew he was untouchable. He knew the studio had bought his freedom, and that realization haunted Newman because it proved that in the Golden Age, a star's box office value was worth more than a child's life. Flynn died at 50, but the coroner noted his body looked like that of a 70-year-old man completely hollowed out by the very vices the studios helped him hide. 2. Joan Crawford, the tyrant queen of Brentwood. When you move from the predatory behavior of Flynn to the domestic horror of Joan Crawford, the Golden Age starts to feel less like a dream and more like a fever. In 1946, the world watched Crawford accept an Oscar for Mildred Pierce, looking like the epitome of elegance in a white satin gown. She was the model mother of Hollywood, a woman who adopted children to show the world her nurturing heart. But according to the testimony of a maid who worked at the Brentwood mansion, cited in the later legal disputes over Crawford's estate, that nurturing heart was a calculated PR stunt designed by the MGM publicity department. The moment the front door closed, the Hollywood queen turned into a drill sergeant from a nightmare. She didn't just discipline her children, she waged psychological war on them. There's a story from that very Oscar night where Crawford reportedly dragged her 11-year-old daughter, Christina, out of bed and forced her to stand in front of a mirror singing the national anthem until she collapsed from exhaustion. When the girl faltered, a slap echoed through the marble halls that was so violent the maid claimed it haunted her dreams for years. Crawford would use an hourglass to time how long her children had to stand motionless, and if a single grain of sand moved, the punishment was doubled.
How did you know?
What you drink? I read the papers.
She was performing a role 24 hours a day, and the children were just props in her quest for the perfect image. Newman once told a reporter from Esquire that Crawford was the clearest proof he'd ever seen that fame is often just a gilded mask for a very specific kind of hell. Even in death, she took her revenge, cutting her children out of her will for reasons they well know. A final act of cruelty from a woman who couldn't stand to lose control. 3. Bing Crosby, the hidden side of a Christmas legend. It becomes even more unsettling when you look beyond the man who helped define the sound of the holidays. Bing Crosby had a voice often described as warm and comforting, and for many years he was seen as the ideal family-friendly star. However, in his son Gary Crosby's memoir Going My Own Way, he shared a much more complicated picture of their family life. Gary described a strict and emotionally difficult upbringing, where discipline at home was often harsh and feared. According to Gary's account, mistakes were treated with severe punishment, and the atmosphere in the household was reportedly tense and controlled. While Bing maintained a polished public image, the contrast between his on-screen persona and private life has been widely discussed over the years. Gary Crosby later struggled with the impact of his upbringing, and other members of the family have also spoken about personal difficulties. These accounts have contributed to ongoing debates about the difference between public image and private reality in Hollywood's Golden Age. Even today, Bing Crosby remains a symbol of classic holiday music, but his legacy is often viewed with a more complex and human perspective. But it raises a bigger question about how public figures are remembered and how much of their private lives remain hidden behind their public image. 4. Charlie Chaplin, the Little Monster. Everyone knows Charlie Chaplin as the Little Tramp, the silent underdog who made the world laugh. But behind his carefully crafted public image, his personal life has been the subject of long-standing controversy and debate among historians and biographers. According to court documents from Charlie Chaplin's 1927 divorce case with his second wife, Lita Gray, the proceedings revealed serious personal and legal tensions between the two. Gray filed allegations describing aspects of their relationship in strong and highly controversial terms, which drew significant public attention at the time. Chaplin's marriage to Gray, which took place when she was 16, has since been widely discussed by historians and biographers, and remains one of the most debated parts of his personal life. The details from the case contributed to long-standing controversy surrounding his private relationships during that period. The studio system treated Chaplin like a god, allowing him to bypass the moral standards they forced on everyone else. He had a pattern of finding young, impressionable girls, marrying them to stay out of jail, and then treating them like disposable objects once they reached adulthood. Newman reportedly found Chaplin's public persona nauseating because he knew the little tramp was actually a cold, calculating man who viewed women as playthings for his ego. When Chaplin was eventually exiled from America, the public thought it was about politics, but the people inside the industry knew the trail of broken young women he'd left behind was starting to catch up with him. He was a man who understood the power of the camera to lie, and he used it to hide a lifetime of predatory behavior behind a mustache and a cane. 5. Clark Gable, the King's hit and run. Clark Gable was the king of Hollywood. He was rugged, masculine, and seemingly untouchable. But even kings have skeletons, and Gable's was buried beneath the asphalt of a Los Angeles street. In 1933, a rumor began to circulate that Gable had been involved in a hit-and-run accident while driving drunk, an accident that allegedly left a pedestrian dead. In any other world, that's a prison sentence. In Golden Age Hollywood, it was a job for the fixers. According to the research of E.J. Fleming, a film historian who spent years digging into the MGM archives, the studio's top fixer, Howard Strickling, arrived at the scene before the police. The fix was elegant and brutal. Strickling reportedly arranged for another man to take the blame, paying him off and ensuring the police reports were adjusted to remove Gable's name entirely. This was the reality of the era. If you were a top earner like Gable, you could literally get away with murder, but the cover-ups didn't stop at car accidents. Gable also fathered a secret daughter with the actress Loretta Young, a child the studio forced Young to hide in an orphanage and then adopt back to prevent a scandal that would have ruined Gable's manly image. Newman, who took great pride in his own long marriage and personal honesty, was reportedly disgusted by the level of deceit Gable required just to function. It wasn't just one man's mistake, it was an entire industry agreeing that the truth was an obstacle to be removed. 6. Kirk Douglas, the hero's shadow. And then we have Spartacus himself, Kirk Douglas. The screen image was that of a man who broke chains and fought for the oppressed. But in the real world, Douglas was accused of using his power to forge chains for others. The most chilling story, one that stayed a whisper for decades until it finally broke the surface, involves a young Natalie Wood. In the summer of 1954, when Wood was only 15, her mother reportedly drove her to the Chateau Marmont for a mentoring meeting with Douglas. According to Wood's own sister, Lana Wood, in her 2021 memoir, Natalie returned from that meeting a different person. She was disheveled, crying, and told her mother that Douglas had hurt her. But instead of calling the police, her mother, a woman obsessed with her daughter's fame, told her to stay silent. She was told that if she spoke up, her career was over before it started. Douglas went on to receive the Presidential Medal of Freedom and an honorary Oscar, while the girl he allegedly traumatized lived her life in fear of the men who ruled the industry. Newman was famously cold toward Douglas in later years, once delivering a line that froze a studio room. While Spartacus may have been a hero, Kirk Douglas was never one to the girls he hunted. It's a staggering reminder that the honorary Oscars given to these men often covered up a trail of broken lives that were sacrificed on the altar of the studio's bottom line. But if you think an alleged misconduct cover-up is bad, wait until you hear about Wallace Beery. 7. Wallace Beery, the studio's killer. He was the champ, the lovable, gruff guy with a heart of gold who won an Oscar for playing a devoted father. But in 1937, the Golden Age mask slipped in a way that should have ended with a murder conviction. Ted Healy, the man who actually created the Three Stooges, was beaten to death outside a nightclub called the Trocadero. Witnesses at the scene described a massive man who looked exactly like Beery, pummeling Healy with punches so heavy they literally shattered his internal organs. Instead of an arrest, there was a vanishing act. MGM immediately put Beery on a boat to Europe for a spontaneous vacation. By the time the investigation gained steam, the witnesses had suddenly changed their stories, and the coroner, who was on the studio's payroll, ruled the death was merely alcohol-related. Beery walked free, returned to Hollywood months later, and was welcomed back as if nothing had happened. He was even known to bully child actors like Mickey Rooney on set, laughing as he slapped them for minor mistakes just to prove how much power he had. According to journalist Sheila Graham, some stars were simply too big for the law, and Beery was the ultimate proof of that. He was a monster who was protected because he brought in the crowds, a trade-off the studios were happy to make every single day. 8. Mickey Rooney, the Gilded Brat. Mickey Rooney is perhaps the most heartbreaking entry on this list because he was America's boy. He was the top box office draw for 3 years straight, the energetic kid from the Andy Hardy movies who charmed millions. But that energy had a dark, predatory edge that the studios worked overtime to hide. According to a private confession Elizabeth Taylor made to Paul Newman, which Newman later shared with his own biographers, Rooney was a nightmare for any young woman who crossed his path. When Taylor was only 14 years old, Rooney, who was 25 and a massive star, began a relentless, leering obsession with her. A classmate from Taylor's acting lessons recalled seeing the young girl wearing heavy sweaters in the middle of a California heatwave just to hide her developing body from Rooney's stare. She was terrified of him, but at MGM, Rooney was the moneymaker. If a columnist like Hedda Hopper tried to hint at his behavior, the studio would shut it down within hours. Rooney was a protected asset, and that protection allowed him to treat the studio lot like his personal hunting ground. He spent his later years complaining that Hollywood had abandoned him, but Newman's take was much simpler. He was the clearest evidence of how a charming smile can hide a very dark soul. He died, leaving behind a legacy of chaos, gambling debt, and a trail of women who were relieved to see him finally exit the stage. 9. Gloria Swanson, the diva of destruction. While the others used violence, Gloria Swanson used the sheer weight of her ego to destroy livelihoods. During the filming of the massive project Queen Kelly, Swanson's vanity reached a level that can only be described as sociopathic. She demanded that entire sets be torn down and rebuilt because the color of the fabric didn't perfectly suit her eyes. According to production logs from the era, she blew the entire budget on her own whims, causing the film to collapse before it was even finished. This wasn't just a diva moment. It was the middle of the Great Depression. Hundreds of crew members, electricians, carpenters, background actors, lost their jobs and their ability to feed their families because Swanson wanted a different shade of velvet. She lived in gold-plated luxury while the rest of the country was in breadlines, and she felt absolutely no remorse for the little people she trampled. She hired jewelers to encrust her gloves with gems worth a family's entire fortune while people were starving outside her gates. She ended her life much like the character she played in Sunset Boulevard, alone in a mansion surrounded by mirrors, with no one left to admire her but herself. She had turned her own radiance into ashes, proving that sometimes the greatest evil isn't a single act of violence, but a lifetime of utter indifference to the suffering of others. But doesn't all this make you wonder, was Paul Newman actually exposing the devils, or was he hiding his own? The whistleblower's burden. We have journeyed through a gallery of Hollywood's darkest figures, listening to the voice of Paul Newman as our guide. We have trusted him because to us, he has always been the beacon of integrity in an industry of lies. But history has a terrifying way of whispering truths that we are not always ready to hear. The final name on this list isn't a stranger. It's the man who told the story. We have to talk about Sal Mineo. Mineo was the golden boy of the 1950s, but he committed the one sin Hollywood could not forgive. He was honest about being gay. The tragedy struck on February 12, 1976, when Mineo was stabbed to death in a West Hollywood alley. The police called it a random robbery, but the details never added up. According to a 1977 report in a Hollywood Insider publication, shortly after the murder, Newman's private representatives were seen at Minio's apartment, removing personal papers and diaries before the authorities could get there. Many believe they were hiding evidence of a secret, dangerous affair between the two men. Was the whistleblower not just an observer, but a man desperate to hide his own secrets from the same fixer system he claimed to despise? When Newman was finally asked about Sal Mineo years later, he stayed silent for a long, uncomfortable moment before saying that Hollywood killed Sal with silence. To the public, it sounded like a poetic accusation. To those who knew the whispers, it sounded like a confession. It was as if Newman was admitting that even the heroes were part of the silence. The Golden Age was never a paradise. It was a grand stage where devils wore the clothing of stars. We can still admire the talent, but we can never again afford to forget the victims. The children, the young girls, and the gentle souls like Sal Mineo who were trampled under the ruthless heels of ambition. The screen only shows us what they want us to see, but the truth is always buried in the shadows. Thanks for watching. Did you like this video? If you did, please consider liking, dropping a comment, and hitting the subscribe button so that you don't miss out on our new uploads.